Every 7 years, a small village in England falls silent. No dogs bark, no lights flicker, and the old church bell rings by itself at midnight. Locals say it's a curse, one born from the day the village chose to die, to save the world. This is the forgotten story of Eyam, the village that still whispers through time. Welcome back to a journey into the shadows of history. Today, we're exploring a story that blurs the line between historical fact, folklore, and the genuinely unsettling. It's the tale of a small village that made a sacrifice so profound, its echoes are said to still ripple through the very fabric of time. We're heading to Eyam, a picturesque village nestled in the heart of England's Peak District. But beneath its charming stone cottages and rolling green hills lies a story of immense courage and a haunting legacy that some believe has never truly gone away. Our story begins in the year 1665. England was in the grip of one of the most terrifying pandemics in human history, the Great Plague, a devastating outbreak of the bubonic plague. London was a city of death, its streets filled with despair as thousands succumbed to the disease. Far from the capital's chaos, the village of Eyam lived in blissful ignorance, a quiet community going about its daily life. But death was on its way, hidden in the most mundane of packages. A local tailor named George Vickers had ordered a bundle of cloth from London. Unbeknownst to him, this simple delivery was a Trojan horse. Tucked away within the fabric were fleas carrying the deadly Yersinia pestis bacteria. Within a week of opening the bundle, George Vickers was dead. His death marked the beginning of Eyam's nightmare. The plague began to creep through the village, silently at first, then with terrifying speed. People who were healthy one day were gone the next, suffering from fever, chills, and the horrifying telltale sign of the plague: the swollen, blackened lymph nodes known as buboes. Fear began to poison the community, just as surely as the disease itself. Neighbors who had shared their lives for generations now looked at each other with suspicion. Every cough, every shiver sent a wave of panic through the streets. The bonds of community were fraying as the instinct for self-preservation took over. As the body count rose and the village descended into terror, two men stepped forward to change the course of history. The village rector, William Mompesson, and his predecessor, the Puritan minister Thomas Stanley, knew they were facing an impossible choice. They understood how the plague spread. If the villagers fled to seek safety in neighboring towns, and cities like Sheffield or Manchester, they wouldn't be escaping death. They would be carrying it with them. They would become the very instruments of the plague's expansion across the north of England. In a desperate, candle-lit meeting inside the old village church, Mompesson gathered the terrified survivors. His words, which have been passed down through history, were both a plea and a command. He painted a stark picture of the devastation they would unleash if they ran. He then made an almost unthinkable proposal: they should quarantine themselves, willingly. They would seal off their village from the outside world, creating a self-imposed prison to contain the disease. He asked them to stay, to face the plague together, even if it meant certain death for many, if not all of them. It was a request to choose the good of the many over the survival of the few. And in an act of extraordinary courage and collective sacrifice, the villagers agreed. They made a pact. They would not flee. They would face their fate inside the confines of their own homes. The boundary of the village was marked by stones, creating a perimeter that no one was to cross. At these boundary stones, supplies from neighboring villages like food and medicine were left for them. Payment was made by leaving coins in troughs filled with vinegar, which was believed to disinfect them. Families stood at the edges of their world, waving goodbye to relatives in the outside world, fully aware that they might never see them again. The village of Eyam had willingly signed its own death warrant to protect the lives of thousands they would never meet. What followed was a year of unimaginable horror and silence. From the summer of 1665 to the autumn of 1666, Eyam became an island of death. The plague raged relentlessly through the sealed community. The village streets, once bustling with life, fell eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the mournful tolling of the church bell announcing another death, and the sound of shovels hitting the earth. As the death toll mounted, normal societal functions collapsed. There were no formal funerals, no church services. The risk of contagion was too great. Families were forced to bury their own dead in gardens, fields, or any patch of available ground. The story of Elizabeth Hancock is particularly harrowing. She survived, but watched as her husband and all 6 of her children died within a single week. Alone, she dragged each of their bodies from the family cottage and buried them in a nearby field, a place now known as the Riley Graves. These small, weathered gravestones still stand today as a heart-wrenching monument to one family's tragedy. By the time the plague finally burned itself out 14 months later, at least 260 of the village's approximately 350 inhabitants were dead. It was a catastrophic loss of life, but their sacrifice was not in vain. The plague stopped at Eyam. It did not spread to the surrounding countryside. The village's selfless act of quarantine had worked. They had saved countless lives. For centuries after the plague, Eyam slowly healed. It became a place of remembrance, a symbol of human courage. The story was told, memorials were built, and life returned to a new normal. But as the years turned into decades, and decades into centuries, strange new stories began to surface. Stories that suggested the village's past was not entirely at rest. Locals began to speak of a peculiar phenomenon, a curse, or perhaps a recurring echo of that tragic year. They claimed that every 7 years, a strange stillness would descend upon the village. It's said that on these specific years, the old church bell at St. Lawrence's would be heard ringing at midnight, despite the bell tower being locked and the ropes untouched. Farm animals would reportedly go missing overnight, only to reappear days later, or not at all. A strange energy seemed to settle over the village, and many reported clocks and watches stopping at exactly midnight, the traditional witching hour. Was it mass hysteria? A local legend spun to attract tourists? Or was something else going on? These tales were mostly dismissed as folklore until 1986. A BBC documentary crew arrived in Eyam to film a segment about its history. As they set up their equipment near the old church and the plague-era cottages, they encountered a series of inexplicable technical failures. Fully charged batteries would drain in minutes. Audio equipment would pick up static or fail completely. Cameras would glitch and refuse to record, but only when pointed at specific locations, particularly the areas where plague victims were buried. The crew, seasoned professionals, were baffled. Once they moved away from these sites, their equipment worked perfectly again. Coincidence? Or was some unseen force interfering with their work? This brings us to the modern day and the continuation of this strange 7-year cycle. The most recent significant year was 2021. This wasn't just any 7th year. It marked exactly 356 years since the plague began, a number that, while not a round figure, added to the mystique for those who follow the numerology of the legend. Throughout 2021, villagers and visitors reported an increase in unusual occurrences. The whispers grew louder, both literally and figuratively. People walking near the Riley graves and other burial sites at dusk claimed to hear faint, disembodied voices on the wind. Some said the whispers sounded like names being called. Others claimed to have heard a clear, soft phrase, "We kept you safe." It was as if the spirits of the dead were gently reminding the living of their sacrifice. Scientists and skeptics, of course, have rational explanations. The ringing bell could be the result of metal contracting and expanding with temperature changes, or the acoustic tricks of wind passing through the belfry. The draining batteries could be attributed to cold, damp weather conditions typical of the Peak District. And the whispers? simply the wind sighing through the trees and old stone walls, a phenomenon known as pareidolia, where the human brain finds patterns and meaning in random noise. These are all plausible explanations. But for many in Eyam, and for those who visit seeking a connection to its past, the feeling is undeniable. They believe that the immense trauma and courage embedded in this land left a spiritual imprint. They say the spirits of Eyam don't awaken to haunt, but to remember. They rise every 7 years not as a curse, but as a solemn reminder of what it means to sacrifice for the greater good. So if you ever find yourself walking the quiet lanes of Eyam, especially as evening falls, take a moment to listen. Listen past the sound of the wind. And if the air grows unnaturally still, if the night becomes too quiet, and you hear the distant, lonely toll of a single bell, remember the story you heard today. Remember the village that chose to die so that the world around it could live. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the heart of Eyam's history and mystery. What do you believe? Is it a ghost story or a powerful legacy of human bravery? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring the forgotten corners of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. Thanks for watching.